This is Beyond 2012. This is Tony Kudos. And I have with me tonight, for those of you who do not know James, James is an independent researcher and discloser, decidedly outside the streams of so-called internet whistleblower projects. He's above and beyond that. He's both an insider and an outsider, and he fearlessly lets hard truths that most do not wish to hear be spoken. So, good evening to you, James.
Good evening to you, Tony.
Hi. Tell us a little bit more, because that was a very, very short introduction of who you are. For those that don't know you, perhaps you'd like to embellish that a little bit more.
Well, I didn't even think about coming forward until there were discussions about these craft, as they were referred to, in the sun. And the debate began to try to figure out what they were doing there and how big they were and the pattern of their behavior from the SOHO images that for the first time actually reveal the presence. They've been there all the time. I think that basically came about because other space agencies than NASA were involved. And it wouldn't look right for them to show something that wasn't coming out of the official rendering of NASA. And even the naval laboratories let the cat out of the bag about a structure that was associated with the sun. So it was an opportunity for me to come forward and discuss these electromotive vehicles and to put them into a cosmology that makes far more sense than what astronomers and astrophysicists have been trying to sell you for 300 years.
Gotcha. And of course, since then, you've extrapolated out into discussing what's really happening in our world right now, and you really have built yourself a reputation for being extremely outspoken about it and really calling a spade, and that's a good thing. I'm going to introduce Crystal Clark, and for those that have not ever heard Crystal before, she's an author, she's a philosopher. Her message is extremely strong, and really her message is aimed towards preventing a cataclysmic self-destructive episode for humanity. And fundamental principle of prevention requires a lot of proper knowledge, and so that we can actually see what those who arguably shouldn't be in control are aiming to create and what they're aiming to do with humanity. And she has really come to the fore recently with a very, very powerful message that she's going to be sharing. So welcome, Crystal. Please fill in some of the blanks. Tell everybody a little more about yourself.
All right. First of all, thank you for having James and I on your show. I appreciate it. My first book was released in December of 2009, and I have removed that book from circulation to revise and update it. But the basic premise of the book was that we are repeating all of the same patterns that have caused previously cataclysmic self-destruction episodes. And what I mean by the pattern is, what I discovered is that we are not told about the way creational design systems function, and people can call it, natural law. I refer to it as the sacred science, so that there's always the sacred attached to the science. But inevitably what happens is a small group of people get their hands on it, and they do not tell the rest of their people how it works, because on the back end they are manipulating it, they are weaponizing it, and they are using it as a method of control for their population. And once that happens, it begins this downward spiral that only has one final outcome. And I think that's, a lot of people can really identify with that now, because we really have done all of this before. And when I first released the information, I did it through the alternative media because I didn't know where else to do it. And what really surprised me is that they were not as open to it as I thought they would be, because even the alternative media is so polarized. On the right side, you have the UFO community that is, looking at things that they don't really have enough information to understand to begin with, but again, the focus on that removes their focus from what's happening on their own planet, so it doesn't get addressed. And on the left, we have the New Agers that are teaching people, well, you can just pray and meditate it all away. and that's not going to work either. We really have to get our head around what's happening on this planet, because if we don't, we will get where we're going, and it's somewhere we have been before.
Yeah, you're right. Well, as I promised you, I'm giving you both very much an open platform tonight. I'm going to let you take it away and steer the whole program the way you'd like it to be. So I'm going to politely step back. I'm going to hand the microphone over to James and let both of you take it away.
Everything is connected. Ufologists, for the most part, and especially members of the cottage industry that make money selling books and getting fees for lectures, like to stick to a highly specialized, narrow frame of reference. Of course, they're waiting for conventional science to pat them on the head and say, yeah, well, finally, you got a point. That day will never come. It never has, never will. And they can't get their head around that, and some of them don't want disclosure because it'd be the end of the thesis they're so fond about continuing in their work, in their books. And to be proven wrong, they wouldn't do as well. When I was on UFO forums, I came across this quite frequently. And any time that I opened up the subject of trying to put data together and see what patterns you could find, and then extrapolate some theory, make a leap, because nothing in the conventional framework would explain what was going on. I mean, this was just out of the box with them, and they would let me know it. There were a number of questions that had popped up in ufology that had never been answered to my satisfaction, and I bring them up, and of course, we don't discuss that anymore. We've already decided on that. Well, that didn't wash with me, and I didn't last long on these forums before I get kicked off. But the New Age has gone even further into a hole with trying to make some kind of a religion out of ET and trying to move metaphysics in where metaphysics doesn't apply. There are so many things, so many anomalies that have not been addressed, either by science, the alternative community, or by just simply the mass media, that would advance us, would give us a better understanding of cause and effect in the universe and what we're seeing every day outside in the skies. But, nobody is dealing with this. And nobody is dealing with this primarily because they have some agenda to serve, or they're afraid, or they just simply don't want to be too controversial. So as a result, we have nothing being resolved. We have no overview. And when someone comes along that has, they are looked upon as suspiciously, and that's as it should be. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't consider what they have to say for the value that it has addressing anomaly, making common sense out of what has become clouded, and introducing morality and principle to an equation long without it.
Yes, that's very true. Before we get too far into this discussion, there is something that I would like to bring up about 2012, because I know that people were, it happens quite often where if we have an expectation that goes a certain way and follows a certain track, we miss something spectacular because, our attention was somewhere else. And I know that a lot of people don't really believe that anything happened during those 3 days, for the 21st, the 22nd, and the 23rd of December. But in my work, it's very important to me to understand the patterns that surround us and work through us and where they go. And data mining is a big part of that, and we can get into that a little bit more later. But on the 22nd, I woke up, and there was a silence that was so serene and peaceful, and it's something I have never seen before. And I have explained it before. The best way I know to explain it is contemplation without resistance. And it just was so different. And immediately I began to see in my feed, in my social media feed, the patterns of behavior were reflecting what I was feeling, in that for a long time when we would try to explain to people what's really happening, the hand would go up and they didn't even want to hear it. But something really changed during those 3 days, and I've seen it everywhere. In a sense, it doesn't even really matter if people recognize that they have changed. What matters is that they have changed. And what has changed is People understand that they don't have to believe something to contemplate it. And that is a major, major hurdle that is critical to what people call, the rise in consciousness, because you can't rise above something you aren't even going to look at. That's first and foremost. And what really sealed the deal for me in all of that was how fast, when the Sandy Hook shooting happened, how fast people immediately tore it apart and knew they were being lied to. And when I saw people react that way, I realized that people really are ready for the truth no matter what it is, they just want it. Because, the message that I've been trying to share and the message that James has been trying to share, we've been sharing for a few years, but there just really hasn't been an audience for it. I think really that a shift did happen, and it's palpable. I can feel it. It's the reason that we can talk about some of the things that we can talk about now, and why people are really eager to hear it, because they realize that they need it.
The point that I would make out of that, Crystal, is that, we have been duped for so long, and there have been so many lies that people are starting to see through it now. I mean, they're losing their naivety. And, a lot of the lies that are perpetrated out there are so, they're so tissue thin, it doesn't take, you haven't got to be a rocket scientist to see through it and see, when you actually look at what their end goal is, and you see how they've kind of backtracked and decided how they're going to try and get there, that now people are beginning to question everything, not least the real motivation between trying to disarm America. And it's not just a matter of the fact that even though oaths have been taken to uphold the Constitution, but it's blatantly obvious that they treat the Constitution with absolute disdain and disregard. And it's an inconvenient piece of paper, as our previous president was very outspoken about. So,
Yes.
I think people are seeing through it. They're just getting fed up with being duped all the time, and they're seeing the results in their day-to-day life of what this government is actually doing to them.
Yes, but I think that's the hurdle that we've overcome, is that people are ready to accept they have been duped. Because that's been a very, very difficult thing to get across to people. People don't like to believe that all of this could have been going on right under their noses. But people are ready now. They get it. They really get that we have to have the truth no matter what it is. And I've said this before, and I think it's very true if people consider it. We all want a peaceful future, but we can't have peace without truth. It isn't possible.
That's a very good point. But truth seems to be a very rare commodity these days. Don't you agree?
I would agree. There's a term that people use quite often, discernment. Well, you have to use discernment, but discernment is an empty word. If you don't have proper knowledge, what are you going to base it on?
That's true. And that's the reason you're here on Beyond 2012.
Yes, that's right.
I'm going to pass the mic forward to James, because I know James has some very powerful words to say on this subject. So pass the talking stick to you, James.
We have had inbred in our culture. In different areas of this country and other countries, it is more prominent than in others. Anti-intellectualism. And you see it and hear it all the time, and it has become almost a drumbeat. And a lot of it is earned. You have people that claim they're experts, scientists, authorities, and so forth, saying nothing that makes any sense whatsoever and finding out that they have lied about a number of propositions, even as far as how many planets are in the solar system. So when you have these instances of misrepresentation that are never clarified, because science is the last thing in the world that will ever venture clarity for ridiculous theories, for misrepresentations, for outlandish notions that no one would believe or accept under any other guise than science, like the string theory, like the Big Bang theory. All of these are absurd. They're absurd in any way, in every way, because they answer nothing. They lead you astray, and that's the name of the game. if they can keep you pushed off your own center and get you focused on their center, which is nowhere for you, nowhere you want to be, then they win. Take economics, for instance. When is the last time you've heard about balance of payment deficit or trade tariff or anything that has to do with protecting a nation's sovereignty and its economic security? You haven't, because it was sold out with NAFTA and GATT. And so many people weren't listening when Perot told them, if these get passed, if these become law, if these treaties are ratified, then you'll hear a sucking sound of all these jobs going south. And that's exactly what happened. He was absolutely correct.
We really stopped James mid-flow just prior to the break, so I'm going to pass the mic straight back over to you, James, so you can continue.
It is almost a slide to try and wrap a hostile ET thesis around what is happening to the planet. A lot of people would like to do that. A lot of people have tried to do that. It's almost common grist for Hollywood. But the truth of the matter is that there is order. There is an extended community. ET is well organized. ET bases its stability on non-aggression. And exploiting the colonial exploitation of other people's resources in their planet and environs is simply not done. If it were, then you would see in the skies above you, you would see attacking vessels, you would see explosions on the moon, on Mars, and so forth, at least sometime over the last 3,000 years. You would see some signs of this aggression, and you don't. Instead, you see displays. You see people letting you know what you could have if you would get your act together. It's hard to believe for most people that their own species can be insane, and an entire class of insanity. But look back over your history. I mean, you have allowed international banking institutions to dictate to you war, profiteering off war, interest payments that exceed the principal. I mean, wake up. The damage that is done here is not so much done out of a one-time intention or agenda. It has mounted, is accumulated into absolute, utter madness. And now you're on the brink of every structure of this society collapsing at one time. Now, a lot of people would think that that's just happenstance, or that that's because of this or that's because of that, because they don't want to look at it being engineered. But it is engineered. It's not going to benefit anybody. You can't blame this on ET. You can't blame it on anyone else, because look at your history. Look at the Dark Ages. Look at the Inquisition. Look at the Restoration. You have an Enlightenment and you have the Restoration. Look at it. You said you have progress. Well, the Third Reich ought to teach you don't have progress. And today you have feudalism just as strong as ever. And it's closing in, only it's got a technology that's going to decimate itself just as much as it does everybody else. So people want saviors. Saviors don't come in the package. You save yourself. Nobody can save you from yourself. Not ET. Not God. Nobody.
Yes, more and more people are being told, well, the powers that be are afraid of something, and then cue the paid pipers to come and say, oh, it's ET. But take an honest look around. If it's really ET they're afraid of, why are they trying to take your guns? Why are they trying to sterilize you? Why is it that they want to remove 90% of you from the planet? You see, common sense and proper knowledge is how we get around all of these little lies, and all these lies are implanted into the collective mind on purpose to shield their own dirty faces and bloody hands. There's an article I wrote on my blog. My blog is called drowninginabsurdity.wordpress.com. And James, his blog is emvsinfo.blogspot.com. This particular article was called sanctioned reality and manipulation patterns, and I very succinctly explained the four walls of our sanctioned reality box and why it exists. And the most basic way to explain it is why were slaves not taught to read and write in the past? We are going through the exact same thing because we are not being given proper knowledge, which is where the phony reality box comes from. None of it's right. And the purpose of that box is to hide the real faces of the people that work outside of it. And I don't mean in some kind of fifth dimensional ET way. I'm talking about real people. And there's a really great quote that I've used before, and it says that the planet is not dying, it is being killed, and the people doing it have names and addresses, and that's the truth. These are people doing this. It's not ET, it's people. I know that there's a lot of talk about guns, and yes, guns are our first line of defense from a tyrannical government. But you have to understand that their backup plans have backup plans, and those plans have been in place for a very long time. So in the same way that I don't advocate dealing with all of this by buying precious metals, I can assure you that if our natural systems that give us life become so destroyed and completely spent that you're going to find yourself looking at a gun and seeing the same thing you're going to see if you look at a piece of metal. You can't eat, breathe, or drink either one because they're killing nature to kill us. If we let that happen, and there is no way to feed your family because food can no longer grow, what good is a gun? What are you going to protect? This is what people have to understand. The chemtrails have to stop. I really meant what I said about a shift happening because there are things that I've written that I have not released because there's no reason to release the material if people are not ready for it. And there's a 3-hour-long YouTube video of some interviews I did with James where I've waited for so long for people to really connect the dots and really get how important some of what he said is. And just as an example, I wrote a great deal about this in the first book in terms of HAARP and how they know that using that technology puts holes in our magnetosphere. And that's part of what's cooking our planet and why we have these flash death die-offs of certain species. What I could not find in that research was how it's putting holes in the magnetosphere. And James very specifically said during that show that I did with him, that interview series, that our atmosphere is made of living microbes that in a sense are really kind of smaller versions of the EMVs. Their job is to absorb radiation and protect us from it. And chemtrails and weather modification are killing these organisms. And I remember saying to James when he first told me about it privately, I don't think that the powers that be know this. And this is where I think we're getting stuck. You know, I think they believe they have this under control, but I don't think they do. And if our history has anything to say about it, this is the 7th time we've done this. And they didn't survive it any more before than we did. You see, proper knowledge is so critical to getting past emotional manipulation because right away what I was waiting for people to get on their own, because I'm a big fan of self-discovery, is what James said about how a creational design system produces an atmosphere, immediately destroys all the garbage about the Anunnaki needing our gold to fix their atmosphere. That's just stupid. And you can't tell me that a civilization that's supposedly 250,000 years ahead of us either hasn't figured the microbe thing out or hasn't just moved to another planet where it's not messed up. We have to get past all of that because these are really beautiful distractions that I know a lot of people look for because they're trying to wiggle out of self-responsibility. But this is our planet. It belongs to us, and we have to take care of it. We have to ensure that it's there for future generations or there won't be any.
There are a lot of issues that people have that are being resolved for them as we speak. And I think that if there ever was a time when the public was beginning to wake up and look for the truth in ways they haven't before, it's coming about. I thought for a while that it would take going hungry for 3 days for people to realize just how intense the problem was, so that they would look for answers they hadn't looked for before. To be fed the lies, for instance, there could be economic recovery when there has been no instrument for it, when everything has stayed the same. The jobs haven't been brought back to America, the industry hasn't been brought back to America, and the workers not protected. You don't see collective bargaining anymore. You don't see any of the things that the owners, the elite, have despised since the industrial age began. We have antitrust laws in effect that haven't been enforced, so that you have fewer and fewer people taking over more and more of the media. It's so easy to control when it's under just a dozen or so people or less, which it is now. And all of these trends have been illegal, every single one of them, and we haven't had a president that acknowledged that and stood up for the law since Kennedy. We've had some that were better than others, and that's the best thing you can say about them. Some were better than others. Now we have the worst of the bad, somebody that's even an embarrassment for the elite. And there's still people out there thinking that he's the best president we've ever had. I don't know what planet they live on.
Yes, I mean, that's very true. And I know that for a long time it has sounded really just inconsequential to say to people that if they do not understand the laws that give them life, the creational design matrix, that they will be duped into participating in their own demise. But you see, it's always the same pattern. And how many times have we seen this? People were lied about vaccines, so they went and vaccinated their children. And we have to get to a point where, okay, so people connect the dots. Okay, I get that it's wrong, so I won't vaccinate my child. But people have to move beyond connecting dots to following things to their conclusion. They have to be able to make projections. And when I first started writing the first book, it took me several years to write it. And when I started, the autism rate was 1 in 125 children. When I finished, it was 1 in 65 children. A couple of months ago, I saw a statistic that says it's in 1 in every 20 children. You see, we have to be able to project where these things go, and they always go to our own end. Genetically modified foods should really disturb people because, again, you're talking about a shadow group that think that we're all animals and are trying to remove us. And it's not just genocide in the form of, well, let's take your guns and put you in camps. You have to understand that. Really think about this. When the first studies of genetically modified foods came out, the animals who were being fed this food either died or they became sterile and gave birth to empty water sacs, and they're feeding it to us. Sterility is a very, very big issue. There are vaccines that were given to people in Africa, just the women, which should have raised a red flag, and it was a tetanus vaccine. And oh, by the way, it went in and it reprogrammed their bodies to attack a pregnancy, so now they're sterile. And this is what I mean when I say that creation is very much like a virtual reality program, not in the sense that it doesn't matter and it isn't real, because I can assure you a starving child feels like they're starving. It's very, very real. I made it in the sense that in terms of a computer code, maybe you can change a couple of codes and it just won't run right. Maybe it will run slower. But if you change enough, the system crashes. And people have to get to a place where they understand that the way a virus goes in and reprograms the code of your computer so that it doesn't function, that's being done with vaccines and genetically modified food to our children and to our bodies. These things have to stop. They genuinely have to stop, or we are not going to survive it. And Bill Gates and all of these other, Ted Turner and the eugenicists really don't grasp how much damage they're doing.
Well, let's look at Bill Gates. Let's make a connection that the media, the mass media, will never make for you. Gates has said publicly that depopulation is essential, has promoted the idea of it like Ted Turner. At the same time, he and his wife go to Africa to administer flu shots to some of the natives, some of the indigenous people there. If that doesn't click, if that doesn't wake you up, if that doesn't tell you why recently some of these people that do this were killed in Africa, and maybe justifiably, if it doesn't wake you up and tell you, you better keep the needle out of your arm here, or keep the little sniffer out of your nose. A word to the wise. Only how many people recognize that that's what it is? If you look and connect, like Crystal says, the dots, you connect the dots, you'll come up with some interesting things. You begin to realize that your interests do not lie with the power brokers. They don't lie with the mass media. They don't lie with the Congress of the United States or the White House, but they are diametrically opposed.
Yes, and I would add to this, just at a very practical level, in what James was just saying about vaccines. I know I'm butchering the name of this vaccine, but I'm going to say it anyway. Pentavalent. It's a new vaccine that has been killing children in India and Vietnam. And finally, common sense and morality joined, because this is what a group of doctors said, and I want people to really think about this. They said that death as a vaccine side effect for a disease which can be cured by antibiotics is unacceptable. Do you really get what they meant? We're told constantly, well, that's just the price, it's the casualties of trying to do the right thing. But how absurd is it for us to accept death as a side effect for a disease that if a person got could be cured with antibiotics? You see, common sense isn't so common anymore, which is why people have to have proper knowledge, and we are fighting amongst ourselves because we don't have it. It's the divide and conquer, and the pattern is always the same. It's so important for me to teach people the patterns. Over and over and over again, we are constantly redirected to phony enemies. Look at Al-Qaeda. There's no such thing as Al-Qaeda. It doesn't exist. But, those are our enemies. Well, I think that we need to get to a place where we understand that our true enemies in terms of global genocide and crimes against humanity are the people feeding us the Al-Qaeda lie. Ooh, it's Al-Qaeda. Ooh, it's ET. No, it's not. It's them. It's them.
We have to read between the lines. We really do, because the mass media is going to lie about anything significant to our survival. I wish people would get together and get militant and say, you're liars, you don't get any more of my consumer dollar. I'm going to state and I'm going to profess that anybody that advertises with NBC, ABC, or CBS, I will not buy their products, period. And that would stop some of this stuff and kind of open up a little bit of leverage that the common man can have on the corporate liars. And the mass media is the biggest corporate liar of all. It's just like when Donald Trump comes out and says, I'm going to buy a newspaper, I'm going to buy the New York Times so I get some truth out there on the street. We ought to be wise to that by now, too. All of us, every one of us out here that had to work for a living, that is suffering because our dollar doesn't buy what it used to, and we have less of that even for many people. They ought to wake up and realize that, anytime somebody opens their mouth and talks this BS about, there's a recovery coming, or, there's more jobs, or if you don't know by now that's a lie, then you're watching too many reruns of I Love Lucy.
The pattern that is so important for me to get people to understand is that these people trot out a new boogeyman. They're the ones that really cause all of this to us. They trot out a new boogeyman, and what happens is the masses go after that boogeyman with their torches and pitchforks and get him. And these people that really did it are laughing all the way to the bank. That's the situation that we're in. Look at the carbon tax. Oh, you're exhaling too much carbon, or it's, carbon-based global warming. No, it's not. It's HARP. It's weather modification. They bet on it in the stock market. So they cause the problem. And then they say, well, look, pay us some protection money and we'll fix it. But, oh, by the way, we're going to have more of our hands in your daily activities to monitor you because you're really causing it. That's not true. You see, Bill Gates let the cat out of the bag. His logic, if we can call it that, is, well, do we really want the state to pay for 4 more years of Granny's life at the cost of $1 million? Or do we want to take that money and hire 10 more teachers and reduce the size of the classroom? And then he said, we are going to have to sacrifice the middle class to achieve these goals, and people need to connect those dots. Eugenics programs and the destruction of the economy go together. It's purposeful. And they are lying to people when they tell people who's really causing all of these problems, because we're the consumerism idiots that just consume, and we're sheeple and we're selfish and we don't care. If you look at the business model, which I call the greed to death cycle, you will find planned obsolescence is built into their products so that they will not last, so that we will have to buy more of them once we become dependent on them, which fills the landfills faster, but it fills their pockets faster than it fills those landfills. You see, I tell you, Orwell would probably be rolling in his grave if he really knew how far what he projected has actually come.
Indeed. Indeed, Crystal. Of course, I'm very fond of saying that Orwell plagiarized 1984 from Yevgeny Zamyatin's We, but nonetheless, the issues are the same. He was true in principle to Zamyatin's work. However, he kind of went along with the program, went along with the path of least resistance when he wrote Animal Farm, which is something of a, betrayal.
Yes, and I know that, as a writer myself, I'm not a fan of plagiarism, and James has shared that many times that work was plagiarized. But at the same time, would we have heard about it if it wasn't? I don't really know. And I think we just need to get to a point where, does it matter how the information actually gets out? We just need to have it, and we need to understand it enough. You see, what bothers me so much about this phony reality box is, what good does it do any of us to actually have free will if we don't know what all the choices really are? Do you see how disturbing that is? I had a woman on my blog today talk to me about Christianity and how they're all being taught they don't have to do anything because they're going to get raptured out of here and Jesus will come and fix it. And I have others here today. What good does it do for the Creator to give you free will if you're not actually going to use it to create a better world for yourself, and you're going to make Jesus come back and do it? Are you not capable? Of course you are, but how many generations has it been crammed down your throat that you're not capable, but you are?
Okay, fast coming up on the break. And that I really feel that we should look at is how these days this term terrorist is banded around, a name used when they point the finger at someone for just about anything. I mean, even if you give some of your hard-earned money that you've already paid tax on to some person at the side of the street who's having a tough time and is asking for some change, even that labels you as a terrorist. So I'm going to throw it back open, pass it across to James. What do you think of that, James?
It's a device to further socialize people along the accords of social engineering. If you can vilify a person, that's one thing. If you can vilify a concept, you've vilified an entire class of people, conscionable people that care about others. You have police action today taken against people who nurse a young deer back to health. You have people that go out and take food to people living under a bridge because they don't have a permit. You have people that try to reach others and inform them of how to avoid certain problems that the homeless face every day. They're considered a threat. It's no leap to understand that along with what's coming is going to be house-to-house search and seizure for guns, for surplus food, any amount of food that'll last you more than 3 days, for water that you've stashed, make it illegal for you to catch rainwater, make it illegal for you to use your well. All of these things are part and parcel of a police state that has adopted feudalism as its modus operandi.
And we were talking about how individuals' ways of thinking are being manipulated and the witch hunt and basically how they're spying on us all. And so I'm going to pass it straight back over to James. Over to you.
Well, it's no surprise. Back in the 50s, one of the interesting things about the New York Times was that their slogan is all the news that fits. No, their slogan is all the news that's fit. And people that I knew who were in journalism changed that to all the news that fits. And that's about right. Of course, Newsweek, Time Magazine, so forth, they were really bad. They towed their Republican conservative line. I mean, there's certain stories they wouldn't touch. Back during the Vietnam War, we had a number of periodicals come out. We had Liberation, we had Ramparts, we had the Minority of One, and we had comic books that were socially relevant, like Wonder Warthog. Now, those got to be very popular, and of course, Tricky Dick couldn't stand that, so Tricky Dick put his weight on the media, and this is the way they were suppressed. Because at the time, I would go down to Central News here in Fort Worth once a month to get the goodies. I had friends that asked me to get some of these publications for them too. And one day I went down and I couldn't get any. And so I kept asking the guy that had the stand, Central News stand, I said, where's Liberation One? Where's Minority or Liberation? Where's the Minority of One? Where are all these magazines that I usually buy? He says, well, I'll tell you the truth. We were told that we'd get them, but if we put them out, then we won't get Newsweek and Time and TV Guide and all those that we really make our money off of. So I've already sent mine over to another news outfit. If you want to go over there, maybe since you're such a good customer, I'll recommend that they let you have an issue of each, but just one, and they got to send them back more or less intact. And I said, okay, well, that did those publications in. But that's how it's done in America. And they have practiced this sort of thing, suppressing novels, suppressing movies. When Toxic Skies was made, it was a Hollywood movie. It was made in 2007. It was banned in the United States because it touched on the binary weapon potential of chemtrails. That was in 2007, when they were denying any such thing existed, remember? This is all part of the package. It's not so much the lies that you get, it is what is omitted. It is, let's say, misrepresentation, falsehood by omission.
Are you back with us, Crystal?
Yes, thank you. It happens on occasion. It was on my end. I don't know why it happens, but it does. I just work around it the best I can.
Yeah.
Going back to what you were saying about the word terrorist, I want people to really think about what I'm about to say. Henry Kissinger is on record as having admitted that what they call terrorists are people who don't want to go along with the New World Order. He admitted it. And this is really important to me to communicate in terms of the technology that they're rolling out, because I don't think that people really understand it. And this goes back to the rebranding that Orwell talked about, which is really prolific right now. You know, in the beginning, Obama had the death kill list, but that was rebranded to this sweet, cutesy disposition matrix. But people really need to get a handle on what a disposition matrix is. It's what they're getting from mining your online data patterns. They are reproducing psychological and personality profiles so that they can identify who the dissenters and the heretics are from the official narrative, which is, of course, coming from the New World Order. And again, this is another thing that really kind of transcends the gun issue in so many ways, because right now people think, well, if they try to come and put me into a camp, I can defend my family with my guns. But people have to understand that if they continue to destroy the environment, and the only place that people can get food is in one of those camps, people will go willingly and they will give up their guns to feed their children to do it. And there are indications that they will go that far. There is an initiative that Bill Gates is involved with, of course, and it's called the Better Than Cash Alliance. And he's pushing for a cashless society, and he's selling it to people who, again, cannot use discernment because they don't have proper knowledge, so it's an emotional manipulation tactic, saying, well, this is better, we can help the poor people with this. So apparently not having instant access to a central bank is why people are poor and starving. That's just stupid. But people buy it. And this is in conjunction with a story that came out just a couple of days ago from the boss of Google, and it was his vision of the future via technology. And he is talking about people the government doesn't like, which he actually came out and said, having their payments stopped and their access to the internet denied. And you see, people have to understand where this goes. I know where it goes. I've written about it in the second book. That book is still available if people want to go get it. And I wrote it, even though it's fiction, to help people understand the projections of where this goes if it continues. There's a future that I think we should strive for, and there's the one that's currently unfolding, and they are miles apart. If we move to a cashless society, there will be nowhere for you to hide, meaning you will not be able to live and survive outside of that system. And what really bothered me about the boss of Google, I think his name is Schmidt, talking about these projections is, imagine if it's a completely cashless society and they stop your payments because they've identified you through your personal disposition matrix as a dissenter and heretic from the New World Order. How are you going to pay your bills? How are you going to keep your home or your car or feed your family if you don't have cash in your pocket? And they are already seeding the collective with ideas that, if somebody comes in and pays cash for coffee, they could be a terrorist. That's just stupid. If I have cash in my pocket and I'm not in a system that is cashless, I can still defend my family. Even if they cut off my access to my bank account, I can still feed them, I can still pay my bills. But what was really exceptionally disturbing about what he said, and this is something I want people to really think about, is that he envisioned a future where hackers would be dealt with by drone strikes. Now think about that, because Aaron Swartz, he was so intelligent and he was trying so hard to get people to really understand. He was a huge advocate for the internet and freedom of speech. And of course he was, quote, well, they said he committed suicide. I personally think he was suicided. And there are other authors who have come out and said that the JSTOR information is really not what he was after, but rather he knew about his professors being involved in the pedophile rings, and that was what he was going to expose, which makes more sense. I think he was murdered, but here's the thing. Imagine if we get to a place where people like him are just murdered with a drone strike and don't even get a trial. At least he was going to get a trial, which I am left to conclude is the only reason he didn't live long enough to have that trial, because what a lot of people have said this, and they're right. Prosecuting people, especially whistleblowers, is a really tricky thing for the powers that be. Secrets come out during the trial. And personally, I will tell you that I think that drone strikes are already being used in this country, and I think they're being covered up and explained away as gas explosions. But what people really have to understand is, if we get to a point where these people are using our psychological profiles, which they have gleaned from our online activity, what we buy, where we bought it, what we're reading, what we're writing, who we know, what we think, if we get to a point where they are using those profiles and dropping bombs on our homes and murdering us without trials, in my mind, that is crossing a threshold that I don't know we can come back from. People need to think about that.
One of the things that people need to look at very carefully is how water is becoming more and more precious. It's not becoming more and more precious because it's less common. It's becoming more and more precious because it's been corrupted by contamination. The monsters, and these are so-called human beings that have lost their humanity, the monsters are getting more and more control of central key aquifers and are in the position of controlling clean water source and letting everything else go to hell, which improves the value of their aquifers, of what they control, tremendously. And they look at this as, just what you do to increase the value of your commodity. That kind of thinking. They're not doing it just with water. They're doing it with land. We are having today less and less potable water and less arable land. It's by design. The control of food and control of water, of healthy food, is growing more and more tight and more in the hands of the privileged, who, instead of operating efficiently, are creating a food for us and a food for them. I mean, it is war. It's a form of warfare, and the only people that don't know it are the ones on the bottom of the pile.
That is so true. And this is another thing that people have to understand, and why I call it the greed to death cycle, because these people are purposefully destroying our food crops with HAARP and weather modification. This is why we're having all the mass fish die-offs, and it's not just fish, it's been other animals. And the crops are being killed. And what happens to these people? Remember that these people have admitted that they bet on the weather and the stock market. But you also have to understand that these people have investments in food prices. So while they're eliminating the food sources that need to feed the people on this planet, they're making money hand over fist, because we all know that phrase, you don't control people with plenty, you control them with lack, and you laugh all the way to the bank while you do it, because when there's lack, the prices go up. This is how sick these people are. This is something we really have to grasp. I think one of the most important things that we really have to stop right now is the geoengineering. That is so important. And, again, this goes back to the eugenic idiots and their population control, because right now they're trying to sell people, especially through the phony green agenda, oh, look, there's not enough resources for everyone. Well, that's not true, but I tell you, if they keep at it, it will be true. And then people will happily watch their fellow man get pulled into a camp and disappear forever, because their fellow man just became a competitor for food. You see, these people have a very ugly future in mind for us, and they are going to profit hand over fist the entire time, and again, laugh all the way to the bank. It has to stop. These are crimes against humanity. They have to stop. And another thing that James and I, it's the first time that we have ever revealed it. We did it on a show a few days ago with Randy Moggins of Off Planet Radio. When it comes to crimes against humanity, again, you have to understand it's the same pattern over and over and over. And once people learn the pattern, it's very much like that saying. Once the audience knows how the trick is performed, they don't see the illusion anymore. All they see is the trick. And that's really, really important. I'm sorry, my dog started barking. I totally forgot where I was going with that. It was important, though. Help me out, James. Where was I going with that?
Well, I firmly believe that any stunt which takes people's mind off their interest and the impending threat to that interest, their own self-interest, is a sleight of hand. I think that's probably what you had in mind. But we live in a world where disinformation, misinformation, and what I like to call malinformation are put out more often than the truth by the mass media. And half of the alternative media is grinding out some woo-woo agenda or something even more bizarre that has no relationship whatsoever to solution. Solution is going to require radical change. And in the face of opposition, militant change. And you have to be committed to it. You have to realize once and for all that your survival is being threatened, and it won't be long before you'll have nothing to lose. And it would be nice if you did something before you get to that desperate situation where your options are lessened appreciably.
Okay, so here's the pattern. It's always the same people. When they want everybody chipped, they're going, because people don't have proper knowledge, they're going to steal really high-profile children and say, oh, look, if only they were chipped. When they want to take people's guns, they stage these mass murders. Oh, look, you need to protect your children from these mass murderers. It's always them. It's always them that do it. And when it comes to the abduction phenomenon, this is something that James and I felt was really time to share with people. People are not being abducted by ET. They are, again, being abducted by their own government. And something really telling about this is the screen memories. Because if it really was a race that was just so much further advanced than we are, and there's no way we could actually defend ourselves against it, it's kind of like saying, well, do you and I put a mask on when we squish an ant, right? So that they won't know who's really behind it. And that's the same thing with screen memories. Who's really behind it, and why is there a screen memory?
So here we are on the back end of the show. We're going to be moving this last segment into a slightly different area. So, Crystal, you were still talking when the break came up, so I'm passing the mic straight back to you.
Well, again, I just want people to understand the patterns and that it's always the same pattern. What is being done to us is not being made clear because the proper knowledge that would allow people to understand how it's being done is being withheld from them. And so it's so easy to emotionally manipulate people, which goes back to the torch and pitchfork thing, and we go run and blame someone else, anybody but the actual people who bring these problems to us, and the abductions are the same thing. When it comes to, you mentioned this during the break, which is why I'm going back to it for people that don't know. I had somebody make a comment on my blog in response to the Greed to Death article that I wrote, and he said, well, I'm really involved with the Venus Project and a resource-based economy. Maybe we can get together. And I say this because I mean it. I genuinely appreciate people that are try and perfect models of an economy that move beyond money, because we really need to do that. I think that will be very telling in terms of where we are in our evolutionary process. We definitely need to do that. But I explained to him that while I am very appreciative of his efforts and I'm glad that he found his passion, my job in the interim is to make sure that those resources are still around for that economy to be based on. And you see, if they continue chemtrailing, I have seen this and other people have seen it, and I know that the people who produced the movie, What in the World Are They Spraying and Why in the World Are They Spraying, chalked up most of the flash death of certain plants to the idea that it's the aluminum getting in the roots and clogging the root systems. And there may be some of that happening, but I think that people will find, if they see what's happening to their own plants with their own eyes, what's really happening is that these plants are flash dying, and it's like they're being microwaved. And this is because of the holes that are put in the magnetosphere and the ionosphere when they use HAARP and they use chemtrails. And these plants die instantly, sometimes in 2 days, even though the grass underneath the plant may be green. Certain varieties and species are very, very sensitive to the extrasolar radiation. And again, this proper knowledge prevents people from buying the garbage. Oh, the sun is white because we're moving into the fifth dimension. Well, if my plants can't survive the fifth dimension, do I really want to go there? That doesn't make any sense. Ash trees, a lot of people are losing ash trees. I live in the desert. I live in Las Vegas. And I did my own landscape, and all of my plants are drought tolerant. I had one ash tree that a few years back, at the same time there was a heat wave that especially affected Colorado. Half of my tree, the tree that faces south, flash died. And another tree on my property also flash died in 2 days. And when it rains, when it used to rain, I actually had to remove the tree. You could literally see when the trunk of the tree was wet, this white line that went all the way down the tree in a perfect line that showed what half of the tree was dead. And the leaves, in the fall when the leaves are supposed to drop, that half of the tree, the leaves never dropped and no new buds ever came out. And slowly over the years, the rest of the tree died and I had to remove it. And this is what people have to understand. The system that they are trying to creating, which is a system of poverty and hunger where you have to go to them to be fed, is being encouraged through the destruction of the environment, because people have to remember they are killing nature to kill us. And so, yes, a lot of people would say, well, I can avoid their system, I can avoid the GMOs and all of that if I plant my own garden. But you see, their backup plans have backup plans. And the food that we are trying to grow outdoors will not be able to continue if they continue what they're doing. Yes, we could move some of our plants indoors, but you're talking about an entire planet of food that will eventually cook to death. And I have talked about this before in the first book, which again is not available, but I found a past life regression session that I actually opened the book with in one of the first chapters, wherein the individual was reliving the last few moments of a previous cataclysmic destruction episode, and they clearly stated that everything was cooking because their scientists were doing experiments that were destroying their atmosphere. Do you see where I'm going with this? So again, yes, guns are important, but if you can't have children because you're sterile and you can't eat food, what are you going to protect?
You know, everything's moving on so fast in this show. We're in danger of forgetting to get you guys to give the information of how people can contact you after the show, how they can get hold of your books, Crystal. So before we run out of time, I'm going to ask you both to give out your websites, details on your books, and everything else, please. So, Crystal, would you like to give your information first, please?
Sure, I have two websites. The first website is thesoulsociety.com, and that's THESOL, society.com, and that's where I first released my books. My first book is not available anymore, like I said, and it was nonfiction. It was a study guide with 22 different resources that included patents, papers, everything people need to understand. This is not something I made up, and this is really where we are. The second book is still available, and though it is fiction, I built a lot into it because I was able to, in terms of projections, because this is something we have to do. The blog that I'm currently using that I developed as a resource, a free resource for people that encompasses the core of what I would have focused on in the revised edition of the first book, is called drowninginabsurdity.wordpress.com.
Excellent. And James, please give your contact information. And then please carry on. Pass the mic over to you.
Crystal can give the address of our blog. I never remember it. I have no books. I have done a number of interviews, but you can always ask questions we have a forum on the blog for questions. So you can always come on the blog and ask any question you like, as long as it's relevant. I don't like cynics, but I love healthy skeptics. And I'll treat you with respect regardless. So I have answered a number of questions there, and you might, if you peruse it, you might find that where I've answered the question that's on your mind with someone else. We have a number of articles, a number of sources of information. One of the things that I'd like to point out, I'd like to say right off, is that I think 911 has never been examined better than by Dmitry Kulisov in his Third Truth. And we have a link to those videos of his. And I wish everyone that is sold on people like Judy would just see his material and draw their own conclusions. That's all I ask.
Yes, and James's blog is emvsinfo.blogspot.com. And one of the things that's so important about Dimitri's work is that Dimitri, first of all, is in a position to know what happened based on his service and his prior history and his job duties. But second of all, he has explained that he understands that the Sears Tower in Chicago was built the same way. And that may be the next target if people don't catch on, and that's very important.
Well, Silverstein wants to lease that building. Isn't that interesting?
Did we lose you, Tony?
No, sorry, I was actually typing something to you guys, and I'm quite happy with you guys flip-flopping the microphone between you. Okay, I'll say what I was typing. We've got 20 minutes left to the show, and really, with the insight, the knowledge that you guys have, would you please give guidance to the listenership of how do we get through these times? What are the things they need to look out for? What are the specific landmarks that are going to be indicative of everything following a particular direction? And in 20 minutes, that's a lot to cover. So whoever wants to grab the mic, grab it, and please take us forward.
Why don't you go first, James?
We have some encouraging developments on the horizon. Recently, we have had a little bit of military backdowning of the Obama regime in the Middle East. It seems like Iran just may have a secret weapon that's making their ambitions against Syria and Iran discouraged. And if that's true, people have to understand they have to put in place what is good for the country and good for their survival, as opposed to what is good for this regime and its military ambitions in the Middle East. The two don't mix. If, for instance, they can consolidate the Middle East the way they want it without or three via Russia and China, they'll move very swiftly to consolidate their power over the former industrial nations like England and the United States. However, if they don't, that will be too much like putting the cart before the horse. It'd be very dangerous because it will demonstrate their intentions inarguably and at the same time not give them what they need to fulfill those very intentions. So premature is an understatement. So we have that. Plus we have that I have stipulated over and over again that I don't think that the implementers have shared the complete truth with the elite. And if you put yourself in the place of the scientists and technicians and the military leadership that control this implementation, that is necessary to put into final stage the New World Order, you will see that once they get these birds down into their underground retreats, they may decide they don't like their leadership any more than you might like it. And they got them perfectly poised for elimination. And that's a thought. That's a thought that I like to pass off to the out-of-the-mind elite. And at the same time, there are a number of things that have gone on that challenge this regime agenda as it goes to purge the military of people that won't fire on American citizens who refuse to give up their food catches, their guns, and their way of life. So for every one person that would stand against the New World Order who would say, no, I won't, there are probably 10 that will say, yes, I will, and don't mean it. I know if I was career military, what I would do. So it's not a slam dunk by any means, and there are things going on in the world that you can't count on the mass media to advise you of that are going on, and we even have a hope in the near future of discovering some history of prior lineages. So let's keep our powder dry, let's keep our spirits up, and let's refine our awareness and our discernment so that we have a better chance of surviving as a people. I want everybody to survive with me.
Yes, that's so important. And, the idea of fear-mongering, people don't really know what the proper definition of that is. It is a false fear. It is an emotionally manipulative technique that is designed to sell you something. We are speaking the truth here, and we're doing it not out of fear, but out of love. Because of exactly what James said. Yes, we love humanity. We want them to continue on, but they have to have the proper knowledge they need to do it and the courage to act on it. I personally don't have a prescription for individuals in terms of what they should do. What I can do is tell them what the problems are, because I recognize that everybody is different. We're not all lawyers and we're not all doctors for a reason. The mother, the teacher, the baker, the driver, they all matter. What I encourage people to do is find their passion and then find a way to give back to the communities that they serve via that passion in terms of what's needed at the moment. And what's needed at the moment are what we've talked about. The chemtrails have to stop, the GMOs have to stop, the vaccines have to stop, the fluoride has to stop. Find your passion and give back to the community and ride that bull for all it's worth, because we aren't going to have a future if we don't. People have to get involved. And very quickly, I will just end this by saying, Ron Paul had a really beautiful message for people when they asked him, how do we on the outside change what's happening on the inside? And he said, you turn the inside out. The outside becomes the inside, and it works. but people have to do it. You can't meditate it away. You can't pray it away. You can't wish it away. And focusing on other planets so long that you don't pay attention to what's happening on your own planet doesn't serve us. We have to get involved and do it out of love, not fear.
One thing that I would admonish the people that are in decision-making capacities with is that they have hidden evidence of prior lineages because they didn't want to show the pattern of extinction and wise up people to what is coming as an inevitability. And they know that what I'm saying is true. And I can give you one case point after another of their suppression of history and records. So what I would say more than anything else is that wise up, understand if the predecessors who are operating under the same goals and intentions and agendas had what should have been fruitful, should have had led to what they wanted, if that was possible, don't you think that it wouldn't have led to extinction? And what you're doing is the same thing. There is no hope for you to succeed and survive at the same time. What you have in mind doing is to turn this world into a place where no one will not only want to live, but can live.
Yes, that's right.
Okay. Now, what I'd like you to share with the listeners is really a message to carry us forward. I believe that 2013 is going to be very much the year that it all happens. The year which, as a mark, we look back and go, they were the good times before 2013. What's going to carry people forward? What's going to improve their chances of survivability through all of this? How are we going to make it? And what have we got to do to try and save the day?
Proper knowledge and dedication, acting on it, and we'll get there. It's not as hard as people think. If you look at these people that we call the shadow government, you're talking about a very small handful of the 7 billion people on this planet. If it was just a numbers game, we've already won. That's the thing. I'm so sick and tired of hearing that we're useless eaters because you cannot emotionally manipulate people that don't care. I know that people care. What we need is for them to care enough to actually get involved and change it, and that's all it takes. If we change it, it changes. It's really that simple.
You have people from other places, even outside this solar system, who are rooting for you. This has become an arena for the most spectacular event in this part of the galaxy. There are many, many people paying attention. They want to see you survive. The universe wants variation. And you are something that the universe has not seen before. So if you can survive, if you can get over the hump, if you can overcome your technology, you can belong to something wonderful. And you will be a wonderful asset. You'll be a wonderful addition to it.
I really love that part of James's message. It's so beautiful. I've seen emails from people that bent out of shape over his talk about the EMVs, and I really can't understand at what level of their soul it insults them that we could be so loved that we would be protected, because that's what life can't exist any other way. And if nature is built on that principle, we ourselves behaving that way. The human race is beautiful, and I want to see them carry on. I think that they would be a great addition to the universe. And I would like to see it happen, and there's no reason that it can't. And when we hear people say, well, will we make it? My answer is, I don't know. Will we? Are we going to do what it takes? And what does it take? We have to remove the people that are in power from those positions because they abuse them to not just their own end, but to the end of all of us. That's the answer.
I mean, for sure, these are trying times. These are the tribulations. I'm hoping very much that 2013 is the birthing pangs and that we come out the other end of it as something truly spectacular.
And this is the moment we were born for.
I've waited a long time for this.
Well,
so many of us have.
The thing I would tell people is imagine how horrible it is to get close to death, leaving loved ones behind, to something that you know is unjust, something that you know has an inevitable decline, even to death, to leave them behind and to feel partly responsible. And we are living in a period we're going to see it resolved. We're going to see justice one way or the other. It's going to be resolved for us. This is the finest time for a conscionable person to be living in. It is a time where we're going to get the closure that we can carry on to a new life as an immortal spirit.
Crystal.
That's very true. And a lot of people say, yes, yes, I know I have a soul, but they don't behave like it. And the truth of the matter is that this is an experiment. And if we can survive it, we will add something unique and precious to the universal collective. But if we can't, because the soul is the core self, we get to try again somewhere else. I personally think it would be a shame, because we have worked how many generations, especially if you include all the past cataclysmic episodes and all those people, we've worked so hard to prove that we belong, that we have something to offer an extended community and collective. We can get there. We just have to do it.
I'd just like to say, and I'm going to paraphrase it, what Darwin said. When it comes to survival, it is not the fittest. It is not the smartest. It is those who are most able to adapt that survive. Any final comments on that?
Inasmuch as those statements ring true, I agree with them fully. The way in which Charles Darwin has been interpreted by social engineers and made into something which more or less serves their purpose, I find it contemptible. I'm not sure what Charles Darwin's ultimate intentions were. I respect his work in Galapagos. I think that he had keen powers of observation, and I respect the patterns that he drew upon adaptation and survival in the way in which certain species make niches for themselves in new environments and then evolve accordingly. But there are many things that eugenics has avoided and evaded, truths that they've hidden, like the way in which under stress certain things can happen. They call mutations and are not, but are adaptation on a scale that people don't understand yet. So we're going to see more and more things come about as we get nearer and nearer the inevitability we create.
And you know, it's somewhat ironic, because they've worked so hard to keep these new children from being born. I'm not talking about star seeds or anything like that.
Guys, we're running out of time. And I got to thank a few people. Thank you, Chris and Cherie, for everything that they did. Thank you, Andrew Donalds. We've got to do this again. There's a lot more to be done. Thank you to James. Thank you to Crystal. We'll be back next week. And I'm sorry that 2 hours went by so fast. Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful week.